Alpine, Texas will hold a workshop meeting at 4 p.m. to follow the regular meeting at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, October 15, 2019, in the City Council chambers at 803 West Holland in the city of Alpine, Texas, for the purpose of considering the attached agenda. The notice is posted pursuant to the Texas Open Meeting Act, Section 5.1.043, Texas Government Code. Public notice: the use of cellular phones are prohibited in city council chambers during the meetings of the city council. Members of the audience will be provided an opportunity to address the council during public hearings and during action items. Please speak into the microphone located at the podium. State your name and address. If you have a petition or other information pertaining to your subject, please send it to the city secretary. State law generally prohibits the council from discussing or taking any action on any issue not included on the agenda. But if appropriate, the council may schedule a topic for future discussion or refer the matter to staff. No personal attacks on council members of our city staff will be allowed. The mayor and city council members may call a point of order to stop personal attacks. If an individual continues to personally attack an elected official or staff member in a meeting, they may be barred. And so I call this meeting to order. And do we have anybody for the invocation?
Not till the regular session.
Not till regular session, okay, good. So, pledge of allegiance. We can skip that also.
Yeah, we
that's
can
the
skip
workshop.
that.
Do we have a quorum?
Mayor, you do have a quorum with an excused absence from Councilor Fitzgerald. The notice was posted at 2 p.m. on October 11th, 2019.
Okay, I will turn the meeting over to the city manager. Zimmer.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, City Council. I've got some slides that wanted to kind of run through first before we dig into the deeper part of the workshop. Also, this afternoon, we have Mr. Eddie Molinar from our Streets Department in attendance, and Mr. Lance Jarrett from Jarrett Dirt Works. Jarrett Dirt Works has done quite a bit of work for the city, and both of them graciously are here as they can provide insight and intelligence to the discussion today. So, council had requested that we do the workshop to follow back up on the study that KSA had performed for the city. Wanted to kind of go through that study and then talk about really what our plan is in 2019-2020 through this upcoming paving season. The street study that KSA provided did an inventory along with the pavement condition index for the streets in Alpine. That PCI is really a standard that's used across the U.S. in the ratings of street conditions. There were also a variety of maps and tables included in the final product from KSA. TML, Eddie and I had attended a paving workshop last week. They were really larger cities, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. They all use similar PCI type ratings, though you're talking about 7,000 to 12,000 lane miles in a larger city versus our 1,000 city blocks here in Alpine. In some of the distinct differences, when you look at a larger city, they might have a van that's equipped that drives around and does pictorial type analysis of the streets, whereas traditionally or historically, cities have used more of what's called that windshield method, where you go out and you physically look. So smaller cities really continue to use that windshield type of study versus the more sophisticated mapping system. Included in this particular study didn't bring in a van or didn't bring in any of that. It was more of a windshield type. Now, one of the other things I had asked Eddie to do prior to the workshop was to go in and look at all of the streets on the spreadsheets that were provided by KSA and give his assessment of whether that particular block needs a full rebuild, identified with an F, or just a seal coat. So those are included in your packets as well. As we think about 2020, the goals that Eddie and I have talked about, as well as some of the other staff here, been really more of a three-pronged type approach. How do we get back into the method of rebuilding 25 to 30 blocks a year? And that's what we did in 2016, 2017. And then also seal coating another 75 to 80 blocks with our city team. Previously, we had used Lance Jarrett and Jarrett Dirt Works. They were the successful bidder for the rebuilding the streets, and then that allowed our city team to really focus on seal coat. As we think about 2020, one of the bigger challenges we have in Alpine 2 is our downtown alleyways. So think about that primary alley between Avenue E and Holland from 2nd Street up to 8th Street. And we really want to take a concerted effort this year and work on the restoration of that area. Other considerations is, how do we think through City Hall, around City Hall. We've got high traffic here. Old City Hall, we've got the municipal court, we've got the jail. That particular parking lot is really, really rough. So that's something that Eddie and I are talking about. I should certainly want to get feedback today on. And then also a product that we came across was Reclamite. It's a rejuvenator. This is something we saw at the conference last week, and it really rejuvenates the asphalt. And I did talk to Seth Sorensen, who's the city manager in Pecos now. Primary background is public works. He's been public works director. And he has actually used this throughout his career. He says it does a really good job at...
What does it do?
So it penetrates down 3 or 4 inches.
Oh, it goes that far.
Right, and gets back into the emulsions and gets them to really rejuvenate and causes more binding to then occur a little subsurface. The idea is to rejuvenate on those streets that you're not going to seal coat, to see if you can push out that seal coat by another 3 or 4 years.
So basically, I'm going to use words that probably don't make sense, but it is, for lack of a better term, a dissolvent with a high effluent rate that as it goes down in, and then like alcohol, it vaporizes out and you solidify.
Yes.
Is that, okay. Well, that'd be nice stuff.
And
Wow.
they would come out $12,500 per lane mile, a minimum of 2 lane miles, so think of a $25,000 minimum. And they also would look at that PCI. They would actually do a full PCI for the city if we use them from a rejuvenation perspective. So something that we're contemplating and looking at next year as well, as we think through seal coat and how much money we put towards seal coating, and can we extend and maybe seal coat 50 or 60 blocks and then rejuvenate some of the rest to try to get the same end result for the city.
Could it work on, I'm just thinking about airports too, in terms of our taxiways. We've got some taxiways that we're
Yes.
gonna worry about in our hard surface.
Yes.
Well, that pave tech sounds like it'd be excellent out there.
Rob, the owner,
Yeah.
he is a pilot as well.
Oh, I'm looking on their website right now, airports, roadways, bridges.
Yeah, and he will be coming out. He comes out to Alpine with some sort of regularity. So November, December timeframe when he comes out, we're going to meet with him.
That'd be great.
And he's going to go through and look at all of the blocks with Eddie and I. Eddie had a good chance to visit with Rob as
Yeah.
well and see which ones that we could apply this sort of solution to as well.
Does it, and I'm probably asking more than you want, but I presume it's a spray down?
Yeah, they use like I call them like the 30-gallon tank spray down type applicator.
Okay.
And it looks, what Seth was telling me is it looks almost like a sand, and then it starts dissolving in
Oh,
to the pavement. Now, he's willing to come out and do a trial for us as well.
wow, nice.
Now, when they lay it down, does it have to be moistened to activate it?
I don't believe it has to be
Okay.
moist
But we
down.
would have to shut the traffic in that area to let it
Right,
sink in.
right.
Okay.
I'm looking at a picture of it here right online. It's a spray truck spraying it down. They got vehicles coming in right behind it.
Right behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Yeah,
Actually, the sand is so they won't track it.
Yeah.
And then they come in the next day with a sweeper and they suck up all the sand.
Yeah.
But that sand is just so it won't track it, let it soak into the actual material. And they apply, they furnish all that,
Okay.
as far as the sweeper and everything, the sand.
Cool.
that's why they want a minimum of 25,000
Make it work.
in
25,000.
total dollars. So two lane miles worth of work
No
to
fault.
mobilize.
Yeah, yeah, mobilization cost, yeah. Wow. Cool.
So, certainly another kind of quiver in that arsenal that we're looking at this year to help
Yep.
extend the life of some of our streets that we've either recently seal coated or recently rebuilt. One of the things that Lance also reminded me in a conversation, the biggest impediment we have to our local streets really is our trash trucks.
That's not exactly true. What about the big trucks like came to the bus barn, the heavy equipment trailers? Did you see Cherry Street before and after?
Yeah, so.
Those trucks cause more damage.
Right, those trucks certainly do cause damage, but a day-to-day, we've got trash trucks driving through the streets of Alpine. I mean, you think about our normal truck, light truck or residential or vehicle, they're not really impacting the streets so much, but it's the heavier vehicles. So as we're building our plans for 2020, some of the other needs that Eddie and I have talked about is equipment to work on in the alleys. We've got to have smaller equipment, tighter areas. At our council meeting today, we'll talk a little bit about where we're at in that budget process right now. And then we've got to be certainly very aggressive on the buying of materials. And the other thing that Eddie and I really talk a lot about is a better, from a patching perspective. How do we make sure we're squaring off and getting better patches that adhere so that we're not putting a lot of material down and then having it wash out, which becomes wasteful. The real work in front of us as I kind of think through, this workshop today is certainly feedback from council on the study that was produced by KSA. I will tell you, looking at that study, and just my opinion, their 10-year plan showed 94 blocks, which is 1/10 of our asset base for the city. So if you don't touch 90% of the streets, we're going to see major erosion in the other 90%.
I called it the 100-year plan.
Yeah.
10 times 10 is 100 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just not feasible. We have to take a different approach. One of the other things that I would ask you all to think about is, do we want to spread work across the wards? So whereas we said if we're going to rebuild 25 to 30 blocks, it's 5 to 6 blocks in each ward, and seal coat, say 15 blocks to 20 blocks in each ward, or do we want to just simply go through, look at the blocks and say we're going to attack each one that's the worst out there. 2016, 2017, we knew for certain that Fighting Buck Avenue had to get repaired. It was such a main artery in Coconut Park into the high school. We had to rebuild that. And we also knew Avenue F in Ward 4 had to be rebuilt because not only it's the main artery for that entire neighborhood, but you've got more and more sports activities with University over on Avenue Ave. And a couple of the others that we did were more high traffic that we rebuilt. We did seal coat, blanketed a couple areas, and those, as I walk through town and look at them, they actually seem to be holding up pretty well. And it's now been about 3 seasons ago that we seal coated. We would like to finalize those targeted blocks by December 10th of this year. So that gives us, 6 to 8 more weeks to really be kind of thinking through what those priorities are for each of you individually relative to your boards. I was sharing this with Councilor Curry when she came in. I walked on the block in front of her house, and we've got to fix that. I mean,
No, she wants safety hazards, so they don't speed through her.
Yeah, we were fine with it for a while, like, no, these cars are going very slow, my kids won't get run over.
about a quarter of it is dirt.
It's
It-
bad, it's bad.
It really is bad. And, the back end of this, part of what Eddie and I want to make sure we do is continue to build a repository with these streets. What are we seal coating? What are we rebuilding? So we have a good map for the city as we continue to propel forward. Those were just some of the thoughts that, I wanted to share as we kind of kick off this workshop.
So how do you want to walk through these things?
Yeah, so let's, I guess first of all, my question back to council is, when you look at that study from KSA, were there any ahas or anything there that you feel like we as an administrative team and a public works team need to be thinking through? I mean, the city spent close to $50,000 on that stuff.
They pretty much covered a lot of those streets. 'Cause I drive around quite a bit, looking especially up along the college. I mean, where that curb was supposed to be put in, and that's horrible there, right around past the Highland Apartments, where the water drains out off the mountain.
Yeah, that one is actually owned by Saul Ross.
Is
That,
it?
that street is
That's
Saul
right.
Ross's
Okay.
street.
Yeah, because I've had a resident complain to me about it, I think I turned it over to Councilman Stevens.
And I did share that with Dr. Kipler a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so you kind of, I almost lost my truck there.
Which one was this one?
That's right behind the Alpine Heights.
It's that street coming down from what used to be Mountainside?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
on the
Oh,
north,
yeah,
on the
that
north
thing's
side.
scary.
They've actually got it already chained up, so
Oh,
we
did
can't
they?
get up there.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, but,
People do it all the
People
time.
will do it.
Because I hike up there to that property up there, and people always take it down.
but, they did address a lot of the problem streets that I think sometimes we miss. And I think we kind of need to look at them and, use kind of a guideline. I'm not saying we need to follow, strictly just follow this, but we need to also look at what needs to be worked on first. And, there's the council members here, they know their areas and what streets that need to be reworked. Council member Curry was saying Forever Street, and I've been through that, it's horrible. So I think we need to address the ones that are the worst, in my opinion, rather than just go into a ward and say, okay, we're gonna hit this ward, cover X number of streets. I think we need to cover the ones that are in worst shape.
From a practical application perspective too, we also need to look at these in chunks as well. And what I mean by that is, you can't do one block here and one block there. The work that we contract out to rebuild, they need to be able to mobilize their material to a certain area and do, call it 8 to 10 blocks.
Yeah, that's right, because it's a lot of time wasted moving equipment just for 2 or 3 blocks, so you've got to address a good section of it first.
Yeah. And so like when I look at 7th, I think from Brown going north all the way to Fort Davis. And say we've got to assess that whole thing. We know we did our leak restoration with the gas lines through there. Now's the time to rebuild that entire six or seven block.
Eddie, what's that street that you work on every time it rains, on Garrett and A or Garrett and B? That it flushes all that rock?
Oh, it's over there on Hancock and
Is it on Hancock?
Walker,
Yeah, hang on, yeah.
Phelps.
Yeah, it's over my neck of the woods. Yep.
Every time it rains, all that flushes
That's
out.
flushing down, because you got all the water coming down from up on the heights. and just
From the
goes
heights
on
through
down.
that alley, yeah, through
Yeah,
that,
and it's just a huge.
through that culvert.
Yeah, there's,
My view is that, you know, we spent $49,000 on the study. I spent 4 hours walking through Ward 5 and Ward 1. I found nothing new in the study that did anything to change my mind, because I did the self-assessment, as you call it, the windshield drive. So that's first feedback. The second feedback is, I'm in favor of do what makes sense for the city, not by ward. Because we know we got a lot of work to do, and so relying on what makes best sense in terms of maximizing getting the work done. Just looking at the number of Fs that Eddie did in terms of the full redone and including the 9S/Fs, that's 125 blocks. So that's 5 years right there worth of work. And so getting focused on those from a priority standpoint and putting the plan out, I think, makes sense. My view is identifying the top 25, which you're gonna go ahead first, and then each year kind of do the roll forward about what you're gonna have to do, because there'll be more that'll turn into Fs from S's, just because of the mere fact of what goes on. You're gonna have to work your way through. So I'm in favor of attack the worst areas first. That's the only way in which to work it. I think the only exception I would make is I think we still have to think about what our strategy is to country club estates. While Eddie and the team went and, you know, laid down a motion and everything else, even though it's in my ward, I would not be in favor of putting a huge number of resources out there, even though I get heat from it all the time, from the residents out there, because it's just not a high-traffic area. And I think we're going to have a longer-term strategy, so at great peril and risk, I would probably keep them off the list unless we think it makes sense to go work. But given the budget we got, I struggle to put a lot of resources out there.
yeah, I struggle with country club estates as well. It's, I think, about 28% of our population, and they've got almost 10% of our road structure that we're responsible for.
You know, and compliments to Eddie in terms of, it's not, what's the loop around there, Eddie, that you guys completely redid and laid down some emulsion?
Oh, yeah, I can't recall the name, they've got some.
But it seems to be holding up pretty
Yeah,
well.
it does.
Because
What
I
we
go out
did,
there, you know,
yeah, we shaped it, we packed it, and then we primed it so
Yeah.
far like 3 or 4 times, and it's holding pretty good.
it's holding
actually.
pretty well. So, I don't know, what's that cost you to do that? Ballpark, in terms of once you got it down and primed, and so a grade prime can't be that much. That's a day's worth or 2 days worth of work.
Yeah, and the actual material, probably about $10,000.
Yeah, so that may be the strategy out there, is that we'll get the 26 homes out there complaining, but I'm with you, for 0.8% of the population, spending, you know, 20 grand out there a year meets the need, even though it's not.
I'm not a streets expert, but I think the study is comprehensive. And it gives us an overall view of what the conditions of our streets are across town, across the city. And it gives us a basis, a resource, especially for the roads crew or team, that they can have a reference they can go to and say, well, now when this study was done, this is what they recommended. This or that, our reality is this, but at least they have something they can refer to. Which I think overall, I think it was worthwhile the investment. And I do feel that in Ward 2, how to spread the work across Ward to attack the worst areas first. And I would say is look at the wards and focus on the worst areas first within each ward. Because there are some areas in Ward 2 that I feel like the team needs to look seriously at for safety purposes. And also, in my opinion, there are quite a few streets in Ward 2 where they're not exactly level in the medium area where traffic goes to and from. And from what I understand, it should be somewhat level and then it slants off so that water could run off on the sides. And what's happening now is a lot of area in Ward 2 is just the opposite. There's a slant towards the center of the road, and water, when it rains, water pours down. And of course, much of it runs off, but what remains are puddles of water everywhere. And that's where we have our pothole situation. And in many of those areas, close to intersections, where traffic stops and then takes off, the pressure of stopping and going puts a lot of pressure on the roads. And if you look carefully at those intersections, that's where you have a lot of breaks and cracks on the roads at the various intersections. And what I did do is I did go around Ward 2 and I made a list of the areas that I thought you might want to reassess and look at and consider for maybe the areas to focus on first. But I give it up for.
Perfect, thank you.
Eddie, in looking at the study, there are some roads rated 5.5 and above that over the long term you'd say, hey, not bad, but you indicated it's time to redo them. So you clearly had a different perspective than KSA did. And I don't want to go into detail of it because there's a lot of those roads. Frankly, I was very surprised, a little bit different from Ramon's perspective, that there are a lot of roads that got high ratings from them in good shape that you say ought to be rebuilt.
Right.
What were some of the things that drove that? And just conceptually, that you made some decisions to start doing that?
Yeah, some of the roads that they say they're unfair. To me, the ends are eroding. They're beyond seal coating that they consider fair, like with a seal coat, maybe patch up and seal coat and then come back and resuit it again. I saw that, again, they were eroding on the sides and they've been, to me, they're gone. They're beyond patching or seal coating. Now, again, yeah, like you said, they saw their study a certain way, I see it a different way, and,
Like you live here.
Yeah.
You see it every day.
Yeah,
So that makes a big difference.
the other thing, well, I call it the KSA 100-year plan, they were against chip seal. I asked them point blank. They did not support chip seal at all. Their view was hot mix everything. That's why it was going to take 100 years to get done. And my put is, well, we can't afford to hot mix everything. That's why the chip seal works. But their strategy was, well, if you're going to lay down hot mix, the road will certainly last longer than chip seal. Any thought about that? Because that's, I think, was the major divide between what their recommendation was, why it was going to take 100 years versus trying to get ourselves back and plan in a decade.
Well, I think, we can all make decisions on infrastructure where I call it gold plating it, right? Buying the best that's out there. And certainly the durability over time is going to be better.
Yeah.
But I think we have to balance out with the practical application of what our revenue source is.
Yep.
And where we project to see revenues in the future. I mean, we know we're not an oil and gas community. And the chances of us becoming an oil and gas community is pretty limited. So I think we have to use the chip seal process because it makes more sense financially. I mean, we can do 3 to 4 times the amount of blocks.
Yeah.
Chip sealing versus hot mix.
I think the other part, Eric, is, and you've talked about it before, high traffic, you want a hot mix. Low traffic, chip seal works fine. And I think that's the other part of the discussion, and when asked that, they weren't even willing to head down that path, so.
Well, the other thing that happened, okay, look, so 2016, 2017, when we went out to RFP,
Yep.
we engaged with TxDOT. They sent out to every vendor that does work from San Angelo to El Paso. And both years, Jared Dirt Works was the only company that submitted a bid. The nice thing is they were very reasonable in their prices. When we looked at what we were getting per square foot, it was in line with kind of our cost structure internally. So it made sense for us. I think with what we see across Texas with TxDOT and the volume of work that they have out there, most of these vendors are going to be looking for some of that higher dollar. So we also have to be conscientious that we do have a local business here that has done a good job for us, and that they, you know, have a great chip seal process too, that fits in really well with our existing roadways. So to me, I think there's a nice blend there with our capacity to put out an RFP, have Jared Dirt Works. We know they'll respond to it, and others may too. But then the seal coat side, we have the equipment currently. Eddie's been building the training on his staff to use that equipment so that when we march into 2020, we hit the ground running. Part of the other reason we want to finalize this list by December 10th is so that we can get that RFP out there and allow for responses, because one of the things that I knew that happened 2016, 2017 is we got later on the list for Jared Dirt Works, so it pushed that work later out in the year. I want to get queued up earlier in the year so we can hopefully get work done.
So your strategy, just, and I'm going to go back through the 3 elements you talked about. If it's seal coat, that's internal to you, Eddie and his team. And seal coat is laying down an emulsion and potentially putting rock on top of that. So I'll call it mini chip seal, if I could use that term, or chip seal cheap. You would look at something like Lance's organization, be able to go do rebuild, which is down to base, prepare base, get it ready. If it's appropriate because of traffic, hot mix. If not, chip seal. I'm asking, I don't know.
Yeah, I would not even look at hot mix.
Yeah, I could.
Oh, is that right?
I'll say something when y'all are thinking about all of it.
Yeah, that's why that's why we're having this dialogue.
I think, to me, your streets, like there's such a large amount that need to be taken care of.
Yep.
I think hot mix, you might as well push that off to one side because that's so expensive.
Okay.
I agree completely that at some point, once you get to a place that most of the streets in the city are under control, so to speak, then I think you can go back and say, okay, these streets are high traffic, lots of people walking on them, those kinds of things. Let's spend some money in this area. But right now, I think, to me, you're kind of behind the curve.
Yep.
So right now, you need to, with the chip seal type paving, that's going to help the streets that you don't literally have to rebuild last you a few more years. The rebuilding like we did before, where we just literally chewed up the existing asphalt and went into the existing ground about 6 inches. We blended that all together, watered it, recompacted, regraded it, and then we put a 2-course chip seal in it.
Okay.
That's your next cheapest way to do things, and that's going to help you get things, to me, under control. I would suggest, though, in some of the streets that y'all think are more high traffic, you really need to be thinking about spending a little bit more money and putting base in the streets. Because every one of the streets that we did previously, when we chewed them up, there is no base. There's nothing, there's just the original ground that they fixed up as good as they could. Well, the reason I mentioned the dumpster trucks is if you look in the last 20 years or so, as the dumpsters get bigger and bigger and more trash, that's how, I mean, the deterioration of the streets have gone down a lot. Well, back when they first did the streets, they didn't have all that. So the streets would last a lot longer because you didn't have that amount of constant damage being done to them. So your alleyways, they're deteriorating fast.
Yep.
That's where the dumpsters are at, right?
Yep.
That, I mean, so there's your big problem. Going in and just chewing up the ground and putting a chip seal on it is gonna help you for a while, but it's gonna go down quick. Unless we put a base course. I'll say this time and time again, pavement is only as good as the ground that it's sitting on, period. The only way to control how good the pavement is on top is to make sure that the ground underneath it is where it needs to be. So in lots of cases, like we did, like on Buck Avenue, where that right next to where the street is between the big dip, it goes along the golf course.
Right.
Lots of water goes there. I mean, that whole side of town just hammers that thing. When we chewed that up, I mean, it's just topsoil. There was no base at all. I hauled, I think, 200 yards of base in there and tried mixing it in and getting it to where we needed to. I didn't add that to the cost of the deal because I said we'd do what we did. But I think if you are going to look at rebuilding it, and I think the way that we did do it, chewing it up and doing it that way is a really good idea. But I think if we need a contingency in there that if we hit a block that the material is just nothing, no good at all, we need to dig it out. We need to put at least 6 inches of base. And I say I don't want to make this seem like I think I'm gonna get the work. I mean, y'all obviously bid it out to whoever. I wanna see the streets get done. I would love to have the work, don't get me wrong, but, so that's something y'all need to think about. And the other thing that I'll say is when y'all think about the streets, is y'all mentioned it before, the more you can cluster it, the cheaper it's gonna be. If we have to move equipment from this side of town to that side of town, move all the cones, get everybody to quit driving everywhere, it's just a nightmare. If you can cluster it, now I get it, because we've done streets in Pecos, all over the place, Fort Davis, Marfa, Presidio, everywhere. And we've done a cluster here, then we have to go across town and at least do 1 or 2 over here, just to kind of, so that everybody gets a little bit of something. But I would suggest, I mean, you're gonna get more bang for your buck the more you can cluster the streets together. The other thing with that is like with Buck Avenue and Avenue F, I had a super hard time getting the grades to work with the adjoining streets. When you cluster them together, it gives me a better opportunity to get all of the streets to drain like they need to. It was super hard. I mean, Avenue F still stands a little bit of water down there by the softball field.
Yeah.
Because the street that runs into it is so low that I had to figure out some way to get it so it could go somewhere. And it was almost perfectly flat. So it's almost impossible to get it exactly right. So if you can cluster them, you're more bang for your buck, plus we can address, or somebody can address, your drainage situation. Water's the worst enemy of pavement, period. If you can get the water off of it, you're gonna save things immensely. That's just kind of my little spot on that. The other deal about the rejuvenation thing, I haven't seen that product or anything, but I will say this, in the last 2 years, and I think Bobby Law with Aragon Asphalt has approached y'all with what he called a fog sealer. I, being an old timer like my dad, oh, that's just new foo-foo stuff. I tried it. We did a lot of work for Fort Stockton ISD, and we did a huge area of that parking lot at the high school, and we did half of it hot mix where it's super high traffic, and the rest of it, we did chip seal. We put a fog seal over that, and we just got through fog sealing the airstrip for McGuire's over in Marfa. And I'm really, really impressed with it. It's easy to apply. It's something that your distributor truck can put down. I keep a storage tank, I keep it heated, and I keep it there. That is another thing that I think y'all should seriously think about as far as rejuvenating, keeping the streets that you don't want necessarily seal coat, but are starting to begin to dry up and go away. I was impressed. I mean, and that's just my opinion. And I really liked it, so.
Lance, back on the base question, that really important, when we did the runways out here on the taxiways, parallel 119 in the taxiway area, when they ground it all up, then they put a concrete mix in there to stabilize that base, and you got 18, 20,000 pound airplanes rolling up and down there.
Right.
Is that something that's doable here on our streets? 'Cause I just think about when you go down, to your point, getting it solid, if I could use that term with the concrete, seems to have made a difference. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, it's doable. We've done it before.
Yeah.
We did some cement stabilization on some streets down in Presidio years ago.
Yep.
To me, you would have to really, I personally think that you could take out the material that's there and bring in a good base material,
Okay, so-
cheaper than what you could try to mix it
Fine,
with.
okay.
Cement's expensive.
Yeah, no, yeah, well, it's just.
I definitely in certain areas where, I'm still thinking of Avenue F, that end of Avenue F. It's all topsoil on that end that's sink,
Yeah.
it's continuously sinking.
Yeah.
That's all topsoil. That whole side of town is a floodplain. It's all topsoil. That's something where, you'd either have to look at digging a good bit of material out, bringing in a good layer of base to help hold that pressure, or digging out some of it, cement stabilizing the subgrade, and then putting a smaller layer of base on it. It just depends on, and then we, up here at, what, did we do Cockrell?
We did Cockrell.
We did Cockrell,
Yeah,
right?
we did Cockrell, yeah.
That was just a pile of rocks. When we chewed into it, it was just a pile of rocks. It's just a heel.
Yep.
So you're not gonna have a whole lot of movement there.
Yep.
I think it's just gonna depend on what part of town and what strata of stuff you're getting into. We're working on the Skyway Gardens deal now.
Yep.
We're starting a sidewalk, and it's just clay. It's just pure clay in the bottom. We're putting 2 feet of select fill underneath every one of those buildings
Is that right?
to keep it from moving. So you have to think about, if they're doing that whole side of town is sitting on that same material. Your streets are sitting on that same material. So that's something, it's just gonna be a area by area basis,
Okay.
But I think that's something y'all need to think about is a base course, starting that process in some places, because like I said, that pavement's only as good as the ground it's sitting on.
Yep.
That's kind of all. This out here, I had actually thought about, if you want the citizens to see, okay, you want super nice roads, you want hot mix like the one-ways, I agree, they're nice, they're super nice, they're nice. Do this block, do this piece in front of City Hall, everybody uses it.
Good, yeah.
And you can say, look, this is what it cost us to do it this way. And then this is what it's costing us to do it this other way, and you'll see how much more we get done. But, I think when we first did those, I think we gave you a price first, hot mix, and then we kind of did base and seal coat, and then we did the way, and obviously you took the cheaper one, which makes sense, but so that's kind of what way I would go about looking at it, is you're way behind the curve right now. It's just a matter of getting it under control, and then I would think about building them like you really would like to build them.
And I do agree. I think as we select the roads, we've got to have some level of contingency so that if we do need to add more base, as we're milling them up, that we make that determination days. We are in somewhat of a hurry-up mode right now. We're trying to get caught up
Right.
and just as thoughtful as we can be behind it while still making progress will be important.
Well, and that, we talked about the first year we did it, we did those long streets, Buck Avenue, Avenue F. I get a lot of production out of machines that way. And then the next time around, we did all these little
We did
one
that.
block pieces
Right.
between the one-ways, and we came back with a quite a bit higher price. And it was like, what's the deal? Well, when I spend more time backing up and turning around than I actually do working, so that's what I'm saying when you think about doing your streets, clustering them so that we get a lot more production. The price is gonna be better no matter who bids on it. I would say at some point between the one-ways, you need to do hot mix. There's too much stop and start, stop and start, stop and start.
There's not a lot of stopping going on.
And that's like you were mentioning before in the intersection, that's where a lot of the potholes are at. That's because that's pushing and that's pulling, that's pushing, that's pulling. And the chip seal, a chip seal is this thick. It's liquid asphalt and rock.
Yep.
Hot mix, you lay it at least 2 inches thick to begin with. And it has its own strength in itself to some extent. So in those places where you're looking at a lot of stopping and starting, there needs to be some consideration for hot mix at some point. But those streets right there, if you guys will put a fog sealer on it in the next couple of years, they're gonna last you at least another 10.
Okay.
And then you can go back later on once you get a lot more of the other streets under control. I think if you do the streets good, there's this whole idea of, like you said, TxDOT has really moved into hot mix. They don't really do much of the chip seal anymore. Look at the mess that they made out here on Highway 90 outside of town, that first 9 miles that all came apart on them because they didn't do it right.
Yep.
And then they came and put hot mix on top to cover up their mistake. Now, they won't tell you that, but that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And they did the same thing for 29 miles outside of Valentine.
Yep.
It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Well, because hot mix has strength within itself. It's a lot more forgiving. 2-course penetration will last you almost as long if you get it right. Your 2-course penetration will last you 15 to 20 years
Wow.
if you do it the right way.
Okay.
And if you put a seal coat on it after about 7 or 8 years, it's gonna last you probably 25 or 30.
Okay. Which is what we want.
So there's those things to consider. There's just there's a trick to everything, as they say. But I think the route that you're trying to go, hot mix is out of the picture for at least a few years,
That helps. Very helpful.
to be honest with you.
One thing that the city manager alluded to was there's certain streets that are in pretty sad shape. Let's go ahead and do a whole length of it instead of just that one block. And I understand, where you're coming from, you're not getting any bang for your buck by moving around. But the city manager says, let's take and do this whole area, not just a short 2-block thing. And I think that would be better in the long run, because those streets need to really be addressed. They haven't been touched, and they're horrible. I'm talking 7th Street, we talked about it earlier.
North Orange,
Yeah, North Orange is the other
West
one.
Uvalde.
And they're, hit those, but not just 1 or 2 blocks again. This hit a X number of blocks and take care of it. And I understand where you're coming from again, that, you gotta move your resources and all that out there, but also we gotta look at we're looking also at our citizens,
Sure.
okay? And so that's what we have to contend with.
Yeah.
Because, I know all of us get an earful every
I
time
don't
we
even
go
travel
out.
on North Orange anymore.
What's that?
I don't even travel on North Orange. I put shocks on my Jeep 2 months ago, and it's just like I didn't put them on there at all. So I go out of my way.
Well, and there's always gonna be those instances where you have just a couple of blocks in an area that are just horrible.
Yeah.
Well, sure, go in, knock those 2 blocks out, that's not a big deal, but if you try to chop it all up, 2 blocks here, 2 blocks there,
I don't think that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
We're saying that, we're gonna go in, let's
Sure.
address this
Yeah, and I think
X number of blocks.
2017, we made the decision to do the runs between the one-ways because they were so
Oh,
bad.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's no other way to do those
Yeah.
either anyways.
That was just almost one time, but I think if we go ahead and fog seal, maybe not 2020, but 2022 or 2021, then we should be able to get those to last us till close to 2030. And at that point, we've now, I think this is in my mind, a 7 to 10 year concerted effort to get us caught up to where we need to be, and then start picking off those hot mix type areas where we really rebuild. I do think as we're moving through this, we've got to have a contingency in there for additional base in some of those areas. And we'll make that decision as we go along. We'll add X amount of dollars as far as added base, and then throw that in those places that we determine we need it.
I think that's
You know,
a very
City
good way to
Manager,
go about it.
before you left, you had, or they had, I think, the rock quarry down on 118 had contacted you about giving us a price.
Right.
Is that still, it's still on there?
Yeah, that's exciting to be able to get,
Yeah, because right there, you're only,
right, our haul costs are way down. So we should be able to buy more rock, which will allow us to seal coat more, and then hopefully if Lance,
Well, and that's something y'all might want to think about is, I don't know where your budget is in this year, but you can always try to, rock's gonna be rock forever. So if you stockpile it, it's not gonna go away. You're not gonna get any waste out of it. So you can go ahead and stockpile rock out of this year's budget for next year. And that's gonna save you and on the contractor's point of view, if we buy the materials, great. If the city wants to say, hey, what if we provide the materials for the rock and y'all just come get whatever you need? But we'll give you a price based off of that. The way we done it in the past is we gave you a price, everything. But that's entirely up to y'all. That's an option that y'all want to think about. That if you can get a great deal on a bunch of rock, take it. It's not gonna go anywhere.
well, we've got this new caliche pit opening as you head east out of town.
Yeah, that's mine.
Is that yours?
Yep.
He loves those words.
It's great material. It's close. I'm getting it at such a better price than I was before. It's a good deal. It's a really good deal. So, I'm more than happy to sell, if the city wants to buy, we did that once before years ago. We sold the stockpile out of that other stuff.
Yes.
That other stuff is a little different, and it was a little harder to work. It took some time to figure out. This stuff here is just a better material all the way around. So, if the city wants to buy, and I keep a stockpile there, so if you want to just come and buy 500 yards, if you want to come buy 100 yards, it's there. It's not like you got to go in and buy, several thousand tons to make it worthwhile for somebody to come in. Like I said, Alpine's my home, just like everybody else. So if I can help out, I want to help out.
Another thing that I think when we start this work on the streets is the sewer bids. Okay? And there are rings to compensate for the difference in levels. Brown Street now, and I'll just throw that out there. Great when it was paved, but then here comes the water department, dug it up, and you gotta down those things because they're about that 4 or 5 inches deep.
10th Street too.
And not only that, you got 5th Street, some of that's
Yeah,
Tech Dots, but you also have 10th Street. You've got to zigzag through that doggone thing, and unfortunately, TECQ won't let us put rings on it because it's a brick sewer neck, and the whole neck has to be replaced with cement type material. So we're talking between like an arc pile in certain areas, but the ones where we can do it, let's get together with the water department, let's put our heads together and do it right the first times, and that street won't deteriorate.
Oh, yeah,
Because,
definitely.
you know, Brown Street, cars going through, they're hitting, the hole keeps getting wider and wider and wider. And you compromise the integrity of the street then.
You could blow a tire out on 10th Street.
What's that?
You could blow a tire out on
Yeah,
10th Street.
absolutely. So, you know, those are things that we need to look at also. You know, it's great to pave them, but let's take the extra mile and look at the simple things that can be addressed then rather than later.
Oh, I'll agree with that. I still, that street over there by the sheriff's department, that right across where you do the dip,
Oh, it's street.
that one little, it rained on me like 4 times while I was trying to do that. Had to redo it 4 times. We finally got it done, got it paved, and the next week, the utility department came in, dug a ditch across it, put a water line in. I'm just like, y'all didn't know that this water line needed to be put in before then? So, I mean, I think that's something, any of the streets that you're looking at doing, I mean, Johnny knows what streets he's having a real hard time trying to keep up with. As far as utilities, I mean, you can't do everything, but you gotta at least, you know, try to see, okay, yeah, we're gonna have a tap come in here pretty quick. Well, put it in before you do the street. I mean, you know, those kinds of things that I think everybody needs to think about, for sure.
So on that point, Eric, have you had time to think about that integrated strategy in terms of what's underground versus what's we all see on the surface and the game plan for that? Because basically we stopped for 2 years waiting for a study and nothing's happened.
Right, so the other reason to get our selections in December is to get that in front of Scott and Johnny,
Okay.
so that they can raise a red flag or go to work if there is work necessary. We do know, like with the water siting, certainly our primary work with that group right now is on the wastewater treatment plant. But behind that, we're looking at water pressure on the southeast side of town. And so we may be limited in maybe full rebuilds over in that area until we get through that in 2020.
Okay.
So maybe we seal coat primarily in that little section if there are a few runs that we feel like we need to seal coat until we fully determine what we need to do as far as water pressure on the southeast side.
Potholes. So we got the hot patch machine a couple, 3 years ago, and I get lots of comments about pothole patching and it doesn't work, and I know you talked about, well, what are we doing to help make sure we get a good patch and it's gonna work? And I'm sure, Eddie, a lot has to do with education and all the other things that go on, and expediency of fill the damn hole and move on to the next one, because you got 80 bazillion holes to fill.
No, I think we use MS2 right now. We got a little bit, make sure you know, you get a good sub base so your material will hold.
Okay.
Now, what we're using right now is that Type D hot mix Colate, which we actually heat up to like 350
Okay, so you're
degrees.
using hot patch.
Yeah, it's pretty much what it is, and it's working pretty good. Now, you do have to have a good, you know, put something on the surface so it'll get nice and stick, so the material will stick to it. So that's what we're doing right now. If you don't have anything under before you put your material in, well, you know, that's the whole purpose of patching your pothole, because it's not going to, no matter, regardless if your material gets nice and hard, it doesn't have anything to hold to, it's just going to pop out. Yeah.
So you're comfortable, you got a process to work it, it's just a matter of, are we really following all the details to make it
Yes.
happen?
Part of the other piece that Eddie and I have been talking about is some of the streets, like I think about in Ward 4 coming off of Day Mountain, Ward 5 coming off Hancock Hill, where there's more water running through there. We've got to be super diligent in the patching of
Yeah.
those, because when it does rain, they're just going to have more flow.
Yep.
And as Keith mentioned, I think we all know, it's water that's the most harmful on our pavement. So I think when there is, and we're seeing, you know, a faster, more runoff, we've got to just be as diligent as possible in that.
Yeah, and I know on Bird, which is one of the streets I go up and down all the time, a couple of us from a neighbor standpoint are just want to mix concrete. We're just pouring it in the hole, because we've got some gulches that have really dug out pretty deep. I know we went out, well, the gas guys put in some dirt there before, but we're gonna put some concrete over it, because in my view, while Bird is washing out, it's a low priority in terms of traffic, because we only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 homes.
Right.
We just working our way around it, so, because you know where the manhole cover was, and
Yes.
I'd probably laid a yard of concrete in there myself. It ain't coming out, so I'm not worried about that.
We also saw a product, Aqua Patch, that's water activated. as
Oh.
well.
Oh,
And Marion, gentleman out there, I think, we may get a batch from him. He offered up a batch for trial.
can you buy it by the bag?
Yep.
Well, you can.
What's it called?
It's called Aqua Patch. Or it's Aqua, is it Patch or is it Aqua Flex or?
It's Aqua Patch.
Aqua Patch.
Yeah, because I carry half a dozen sacks of mix in the back of my truck, just to be able to fix them when I'm running them down, particularly in the neighborhood where I live. Okay, that's interesting. Aqua Patch.
I've been looking at the photograph on the screen of the alleys, and I agree that the rebuilding of downtown alleys is important, you know, for not only the aesthetics, the safety, but also the business interest. But as I see, you know, recapping, and paving those alleys might be a challenge because of, you know, bringing the materials in and working it to spread it out and so forth. But more so is we don't know what's underground. And that's the same thing with all of Alpine. And I think, I don't know, we decided to do some sort of underground study to find out where water lines and pipelines and gas lines and whatever else out there, their location, their condition, repair them if we can, or replace them if we can. Because what's happening now, and it's showing up along Gallegos Drive or Avenue, is that every now and then we have a break in one of the water lines. Water comes up, going to the pavement, and the guys have to go out there and having to break everything up, dig down, replace, and repair, and then 2 or 3 months later, here it goes again. And it's and I think we may have that problem again of Gallegos, but that is something that needs to be assessed, I guess, and maybe Eddie and his crew would be the better source for providing us a professional assessment. What can we do, what do we need to do to find out what's underground first before we pay or repair, because it may cost us double.
Yeah.
So, one of the pieces that we're wanting to accomplish as well with finalizing this list early is not just kind of what taps are in the way, but also understanding something I talked to Johnny about, and Scott and I have started talking about, is understanding where are the frequency of the leaks. We do know that there is quite a bit of water infrastructure that went in that wasn't vetted. And we're in a volcanic region, and so if you work for our water department, you're going to be blessed with the ability to learn to fix leaks throughout your career. But we do know there are some runs that are really bad, like out in Sunny Glen, coming off that Pierce tank to the water source, or what we have there, I think, Bride Lane. And so part of what we want to look at from an annual perspective is how do we pick out like maybe half-mile of pipe every year and say we're going to replace a half-mile of distribution pipe every year, and put a number on that or put a dollar amount on that, and just methodically start working through that, but prioritize based on where the leaks are. We also, I know council had approved some of the funding for the GIS and some of the mapping for our plats. Part of what we want to do is integrate that fully in with our water, wastewater, and gas utility infrastructure. So we have this comprehensive GIS mapping that fully, we understand where that infrastructure is specifically. All of these things certainly will take time, but what I want to make sure we do, and part of the reason why I think it's so important that we get on top of what our paving schedule is going to be next year, is so that we can ask those questions of our utilities group up front. Not just Scott or Johnny, but also Randy Guzman as well, because he's got some specific projects that we know. He's got steel pipe that he's replacing, and we'd rather him do that before we repave.
So when you guys were driving around and doing your own assessments of the different neighborhoods, did you guys come up with a place that you think would be the best to start? Like an area of town that you thought was pretty bad and that needed to be the place to start with bringing all your trucks and materials out there and starting there and then working your way some direction, or?
Your house.
Well, actually, from a rebuild perspective, that area over by where you live is an area that we can mobilize and do multiple blocks through there. So that, in my mind, is a high priority. And then when we get over into Ward 3, we've got that area over there that we've talked about, that around Orange Street in that area, that we can get a consolidated amount of blocks together.
Had all of that area had the gas redone? Or was it just that one street that I live on a couple years ago?
I think just the one street
Okay.
we lived on. And then there's also, higher traffic when I look over, like by the Centennial School, by where our yard is over there. We've got quite a bit of high traffic in through those blocks over there. Plus, we have a city yard there, so we've got some good places that we can store material as well. That kind of borders Ward 4, Ward 2 area. So those are kind of the three in the back of my mind that I'm thinking about. What I'd like to do would be, as you kind of go through your specific areas, please send those to me, and then we'll, before the meeting on the 10th, we'll get more of a recommended and maybe pick out 40 or 50 blocks, and then maybe 120 to 140 from a seal coat perspective, have them grouped, and then on the 10th, council can say, hey, let's go with these. Is that fair enough?
Well, it looks like you can start anywhere on this. Doesn't matter where you begin.
Well, the fun thing is we're talking about 2020 and 2019. That's the cool thing. I know we think we're good. Anybody else got?
It's a good discussion on the streets. At least we've got some kind of game plan going forward.
Well, Mr. Jarrett's idea was perfect, to concentrate on the streets by doing what we need to now, and then just kind of get them pretty much taken care of, and then work further into it.
Yeah, we gotta get started someplace, because, I mean, the town is suffering. And so we can get these, to last us about 3 years, 4 years, might give us a better footing for the future. And we can, then we can start looking at, hey, let's do this a permanent.
I can say that I haven't heard the voluminous complaints on paving that I did in 2013, 2014. It's still the number one complaint that I hear, but not to the volume. And I think by, Fighting Buck was awful. Avenue F was awful. Between the one-ways were awful. I think the seal coating, when we got that white rock and we kind of knew where we had seal coated, that really tightened up those streets. And then I thought going actually through Carpenter Addition, they did the entire Carpenter Addition, which is a curb area as well. That really made a huge difference.
You're right, we don't hear it like we did every day, you have to step out of your house and probably damn somebody with each other's streets. Kind of settled down, we still have it now and then, it comes up in discussion, but not like it was before, so.
I'm going to push back on that.
Oh,
There are a lot of side streets that are disasters.
Oh, yeah,
So when we have 119 blocks, that Eddie's recommendation is a full rebuild, that's well over 10% of the city that says we're in that shape now, and if we don't get working on them on the seal coats, we're gonna have more every year. So no, I do get a lot of complaints, and it's not just in one file.
well, I haven't heard them like I used to,
You know,
and I get around quite a bit, that's why I said
Yeah.
that, back then, you'd step out anywhere, the grocery store, and someone would stop you.
I still get them.
No, you're the lucky one that.
I think focusing on the alleys this year is going to be super important. So,
Yeah, those alleys, I was even looking at them one day when I was walking through there. Mainly your bad spots are where your dumpsters are at, because that's where the trucks stop. And those perhaps could be cement, put a cement pad there to keep that asphalt from going back and forth. I know in San Antonio, all the bus stops, over a period of time, that asphalt got pushed up, and I'm talking about a foot high. So they came back and put a cement pad in front of all the bus stops, eliminated that. Maybe we could look at that idea perhaps.
That alley behind Riata is horrible.
Yeah, behind that.
And it's right by those dumpsters.
Yeah, and then behind Ann Callaway, her coffee shop and stuff.
Well, we do need an integrated strategy for trash hauling for the city before the contract expires with TDS and Lawrence. And I think it would be worthwhile to have that discussion before we think about what a strategy might be for dumpsters, because if we do away with a lot of dumpsters, we have a lot of cultural things to work with dumpsters, because there's still people rolling in from outside of Alpine, filling up dumpsters and dashing back out.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
They do it
yeah.
right here.
Yeah, right here.
It is right here.
So that's the reason I raise that.
I'm being sarcastic because I see it all the time.
But the reason I raise that, if we're gonna make a capital investment in putting something in the ground that we're not gonna have a dumpster there, then that would be nice to put concrete in, but it's a short-term deal. I'm looking at, what's our 10 to 15-year plan for refuse hauling? That's, I think, once we understand that, then we can tie it into the game line. So that's, I think, all there's no reason.
If, on your alleyways, I think when y'all look at them, you really need to talk to the store owners and the dumpster people, because, they're gonna be shut down.
Yeah.
And they need to be shut down long enough so that that asphalt has time to cure.
Gotta cure it, yeah.
Over there by the bank, between Family Dollar and the bank, we've just paved that, and the darn Family Dollar, those semis jackknife.
Yeah.
That is murder on asphalt. And we paved it, and the next day, that dude came in there, and it's all twisted up right there in the middle of the road. All they had to do was wait at least 2 or 3 days, and it would have had time to cure. You don't want to spend all this money and then have the dumpster trucks come and twist in those little alleyways and just tear it all up. Because I know I'm gonna, if we end up doing the work, I'm gonna end up, well, geez, your work's a piece of junk, Well, no, you can't do that. So I think that's something, y'all really need to think about when y'all do decide to do that. The other thing I would say is when you look at the blocks you're doing, would you please look at the trees?
Yes.
They gotta be,
Most definitely, they gotta go.
they gotta be trimmed up at least 14 feet, 15 feet tall, because when we go through there with the machines, I can't get in there. Some of that on Cockrell was just absolute nightmare, because and then we had to go in and try to trim some, and then the people would come out of the house
Oh,
just
what do you do?
irate, Yep. What do? You got, the limb will grow back, but anyways, so that's something, if y'all, that's something you need to think about. I didn't used to think about that stuff, but I certainly do these days.
that will be the public relations side of this.
And the earlier the better, that's all I can tell you about. You know, we got bid the last couple of times about this time of year trying to do the streets. This is when it rains.
Yeah.
I mean, so if we can hit it in the spring, when we have good weather, it's decent, and we're not getting hammered with rain every other day, I mean, that's just so much better.
I saw them patching in the rain today, Eddie.
So,
I saw them patching in the rain today.
Eric, I guess as an outcome of this workshop discussion, will we be looking forward to some sort of, Councilman Stevens said, a strategic approach as to what we're going to do with streets to meet, I guess, these goals for 2020? Two questions. When in 2020 are you thinking about going ahead with this? And second, have you considered maybe once the strategic plan is somewhat in place, maybe we can get some public input, see what the public feels about it?
So from a streets perspective, what we'll do is we will narrow the lists down well before the December 10th meeting, get that. We'll advertise again for people to show up. I mean, as we can see, there wasn't, and we didn't put out a PSA on the streets workshop, but certainly there are a lot of folks that study the city council meetings, and we didn't have high attendance today, but we'll certainly ask for additional input. The goal would be to finalize on December 10th what those streets are. At that point, we'll also have budget amendments ready for council review, so we'll know from a dollar perspective what we're planning on accomplishing. I'm thinking the 25 to 30 rebuild, and then the 75 to 80 is going to be where the budget will land, along with that. So.
It gets you 100 blocks a year.
I also think that, once the work starts, once we start seeing the roads getting better, you're gonna have people in your ward that are just gonna be happy to see that something's being done, I think, in all of our wards, regardless of where the work is being done, just to see that something's happening.
And I know that's very true, but I'm just reflecting back to what we were exposed at TML this last week, is that one of the new concepts now is that city councils should look forward to maybe doing a little bit more strategic planning in what they want to do with the city for a 5 to 10 year period, and but with input for the city. And the reason for that is to allow residents to have a part in the planning, and thus ownership as to what's happening in their city. And I think it's a worthwhile strategy, something that maybe we among ourselves might want to just explore and exchange ideas if you guys went to that session. But I found it very, very enlightening.
Well, it's just like that US Quarter of 67 study. The first two meetings were just, we had a great outcome. There was probably 50, 75 people there. By the time we got down to our third and fourth, we were down to maybe 50.
Yep.
So what was the best way to gather information through that? Was it people that were filling out surveys on Facebook and that kind of thing?
On their website?
Yeah.
That was the best, yeah, because that's what it came down to.
Because that would be, I don't know how easy that would be.
And then they put up the boards where you would, put your dots on what you wanted and where you wanted it.
So Eric, are you gonna put the study that Eddie and you did together on the website?
Yes, so.
I mean, I really like it.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of work to do with that spreadsheet and putting the streets that are adjacent to each other together, because it's a fairly distributed list. It's actually sorted by that PCI index instead of sorted by location. So that it's work, and I just got to go in and
I mean, because
adjust.
y'all took the time, to go out and what streets need what. I mean, I went through all of these, especially my report, but I went through other ones that I'm taking pictures on other boards and. Pretty good. Right now, I'm target that.
Can I ask a question, Eddie? You had indicated an X next to some of them. What's the X mean?
I couldn't find them on the map.
Okay.
That's something that I don't know where they came up with those names.
Okay. Yeah, that was, what was the other one I saw? An N?
And a question mark,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I just, those are de minimis. Those are the issues. I just got to check on that. I guess. I don't always dog on streets, because I know it's like right there on Ward 1 and Ward 5.
So I like that you're gonna do that. I think that'll help.
Yeah, that'll help us in narrowing
But this
down.
is good. This is good.
Well, thank
Good
you,
job,
Eddie.
Eddie.
Thanks. Lance, good to see you. Stay dry?
Not today. It's been 2 days hauling water to wet the dirt, and then it came rain and
Well-
had it all in the mud. Now these won't pass.
I guess we're finished. Move we can adjourn.
I think, yeah, we can adjourn until 5:30.
Second. Discussion, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Meeting adjourned. Text will hold up workshop meeting at 5:30 to follow the rate at 5:30 PM on Tuesday, October the 15th, 2019, in the City Council Chambers at 803 West Holland, in the city of Alpine, Texas, for the purpose of considering the tax agenda. This notice is posted pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.043, Texas Government Code. Public notice, the use of cellular phones are prohibited in the city council chambers during meetings of the city council. Members of the audience will be provided an opportunity to address the council during public hearings and during action items. Please speak into the microphone located at the podium and state your name and address. If you have a petition or other information pertaining to your subject, please present it to the city secretary. State law generally prohibits the council from discussing or taking any action on any issue not included on the agenda. But if appropriate, the council may schedule the topic for future discussion or refer the matter to staff. No personal attacks on council members or city staff will be allowed. The mayor and/or city council members may call a point to order to stop personal attacks. If an individual continues to personally attack an elected official or staff member in a meeting, they may be barred. Call this meeting to order. We will have the invocation by Father Fred. Please stand.
Blessed is our God, now and ever to the ages of ages. Amen. Let us pray to the Lord. Christ our God, we pray that you will look upon us and will be with us, and that we said, where two or three are gathered together, you are there in our midst. Be here present with us tonight. And also send down the Holy Spirit, let all of us here present, so that we may have the Spirit of truth, who guides us in all truth and all light, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father, and who together with the Holy Spirit is glorified. We ask that we receive peace, health, happiness, salvation, and help for the people in the Alpine in this area. And we ask in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, who together is glorified with the Father, who is from everlasting, in your holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and always, forever and ever. Amen. Please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I take this flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible.
City Secretary, you have a form.
Mayor, we do have a quorum of excused absence from Fitzgerald, and the notice was posted at 2 p.m. on October 11th, 2019.
Thank you. Now we'll entertain public comments. Any public comments? None? Seeing none, then we'll move forward. We've got a presentation. It's, and as a matter of fact, I have it right here. I think the young man is back here. Ricardo Olivas. Come to the podium, sir. How's it going? Good. Certificate of Achievement, Ricardo J. Olivas, Water Department, in recognition for your accomplishments of successfully passing your Class TECQ Class D Water Operator License, signed this 15th day of October 2019. Andres Ramos, Mayor, City of Alpine, Texas. Congratulations. Got it. Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Great job, Ricky.
Great accomplishment. We're moving forward at the Water Department.
We are.
Reports, I don't have one, City Manager. You do have some reports, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I do. I kind of found this theme that matches our color scheme for the city of Alpine, so I'm using it. Wanted to start off with the 180-day plan, update where we're at. One of the pieces that we talked about last council meeting was the leadership training. We've got that scheduled to begin at the end of this month, early November. I did talk with Liz Pena, who is our director at the Small Business Development Center. She will be here meeting with me on Thursday.